and Chairman of the Great Neighborhoods Committee. And I would like to thank the viewing public for tuning in for the Wednesday, November 18th meeting of our Great Neighborhoods Committee. Again, my name is Malcolm Graham. I am the committee chairman. At this point, I would like to introduce everyone, council members who are with us virtually, and then those who are in the room with us today.
Anybody virtually?
Well, let's do it in the room.
Okay. Julie Eisel, committee member.
Malcolm Graham, chairman. Those who are with us virtually, members, if you can introduce yourself. Okay, what about our staff that's here with us?
So this is Jane Taylor with Code Enforcement. I don't think any of us heard the audio until just now.
Okay, so we'll start all over again. How about that? Again, welcome to the November 18th meeting of the Great Neighborhoods Committee. My name is Malcolm Graham. I'm a member of the committee, which is chairman, and a member of the Charlotte City Council. And we'll start off by introducing the council members and the staff in 267, and then those who are with us virtually.
Julie Eisel, committee member.
Pamela Weidman, Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Taiwo Jayoba, Planning Director, City Manager's Office.
Anna Schloinis, City Attorney's Office.
And those who are with us virtually.
Willie Ratchford, Community Relations Department.
Tarek Bakari, committee member.
Renee Johnson, City Council 4.
Jane Taylor, Code Enforcement.
Well, thank you everybody for being here today. We have 2 items on our agenda, and we'll get right to it. The first is an overview from our Assistant City Manager. Ty, I'll turn it over to you for an overview of the agenda today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity. So both of the items on the agenda today have been heard by you before, and so this is really more of following your directions in updating you on the 2 items regarding nuisance abatement and reentry housing. I'll turn it over to Pam to have the respective presenters, if she has anything to say. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mrs. Jayoba. You will have, and we have today for us 2 items for informational purposes. One is the nuisance abatement. You all will recall that you've discussed that item before, and staff was to bring you back a time frame for when we would, how we would move forward with that item. It was one of your referrals. And then the reentry housing. Today, Mr. Willie Ratchford will give you an overview of the Fair Housing Ordinance and some thoughts about how we address the reentry housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wyman. And Jane, welcome to the meeting.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I am Jane Taylor, your Code Enforcement Manager for the city. And so this is my first time virtually, so a little bit of patience if I stumble a little bit along the way. Today, we're going to go ahead and discuss how the city approaches enforcement on non-residential properties. There we go. Just as a reminder, Council asked the Great Neighborhoods Committee to work with staff to consider how to address opportunities, challenges, and consequences in conducting nuisance abatement with consideration of mitigating any potential housing displacement. The committee met on September 16th and discussed each of the elements of the referral, including the opportunities, challenges, consequences, and potential housing displacement that occurs as a result of our ordinances. And today specifically, we are going to follow back up on our September 16th meeting to talk about non-residential property enforcement, including review of the non-residential building code. So code enforcement can address the conditions related to commercial structures through the NRBC ordinance. We address the exterior of the property through the health and sanitation ordinance, and we address the property use through our zoning ordinances. CMPD is responsible for addressing any crime or activity by persons at a commercial property. In collaboration with CMPD and Code, we both address noise issues, with CMPD being a first responder and Code providing educational assistance on the back end. And in addition, Code continues to work with CMPD through the Nuisance Enforcement Strategy Team. We collaborate on both commercial and residential structures that are problematic in our communities. So a little overview of our health and sanitation ordinance. This is probably the first line of defense for Code when it comes to addressing issues on any property. So our health and sanitation ordinance promotes, protects, and preserves the health, safety, and general welfare of our residents. It applies to any property within the city limits. We previously reviewed the ordinance in 2017, and as a result, we had updates that went into effect on January 1st of 2018. One of the biggest changes to the ordinance was our fines. They previously started at $50, now they start at $150. And we also incorporated a repeat offender provision. And what that means is that 4 or more violations in a calendar year designate you as a repeat offender. And in the following year, you're subject to escalating fines. The first 3 offenses of the year incur a $150 fine. Your 4th offense of the year incurs a $250 fine. And then any 5th and subsequent offense will incur a $500 fine. And that doesn't include if the city hires a contractor to go out and abate any violations on your property. Our non-residential building code is our second line of defense when we talk about commercial structures. And so this was originally adopted by council in 2009 and implemented in 2011. We enforce minimum standards for commercial buildings, and our goal is to ensure that we have safe and sanitary conditions at our commercial structures. Our inspections occur as a result of a citizen complaint, a public agency referral, or a field observation. And the enforcement of NRBC mirrors our housing code with just some minor legislative changes that occur. And then, as with our housing ordinance, City Council has the authority to adopt an order that would allow us to either repair or demolish a commercial structure. Our non-residential building code mirrors the housing process. We receive a complaint. The one change here is that we do have to request access from the property owner. We cannot just enter a structure. But once we have done that and we are able to gain access, we'll conduct our inspection. We'll go ahead and issue our complaint and notice of hearing. That gives the property owner about 30 days to either make any repairs, and the city will prepare for the hearing. Around day 45, we'll go ahead and conduct our hearing. And after that hearing is conducted, we'll make a determination as to whether or not the structure should receive an order to repair or an order to demolish. This is where there is another change in the ordinance. For NRBC cases, the repairs to the structure, the threshold is 50% as opposed to our housing code, which is 65%. Once that order is issued, we'll re-inspect 30 days later. And a couple things can happen. If the structure is brought into compliance, then we'll go ahead and close our case. If it's not in compliance, we can either issue civil penalties, we can bring it to council, we can take the owner to an environmental court through the Mecklenburg County court system. Some of our NRBC data, again, the program's only been in place since 2011. So since then, well, first of all, we only enforce the NRBC ordinance within the city limits, unlike our housing code, which we can enforce in the ETJ. Since 2011, we've worked on bringing approximately 1,375 structures into compliance. The large majority of these occurred in 2011 when the ordinance was first passed. And then since 2011, we've had 22 structures that have been demolished, and we've averaged about 70 cases per year. 70 compliances per year. The one potential change that we would like to make to the NRBC ordinance is centered around the civil penalties. They are currently $500 for the first day and $50 per day thereafter. Since we've updated the housing code and those penalties are $100 per day now, it's kind of out of line, and we probably need to increase the NRBC civil penalties in order to be more consistent with our housing code. And then one of the things we'd like to see, if possible, it would be great if we could add a penalty for businesses that fail to, or owners that fail to keep their businesses secured and, free from any hazards or safety for the public. So our timeline to review the NRBC ordinance, we'd like to take the rest of this month to identify our stakeholders. In December and January, we would conduct stakeholder meetings and identify any potential changes to the ordinance. In February of 2021, we would present our findings and have a public hearing. In March, we would look for council adoption and then have an effective date of April 1 of 2021. So our next steps are to begin the NRBC review process, to present our findings to the committee for consideration, and to request adoption by full council. Any questions?
Thank you, Jane, for the presentation. Any questions from committee members? Jane, I'll ask the first question for you. In reference to the potential changes to the NRBC, will there be a category for nuisance free? And that's what I'm focusing on in terms of a property that has a number of calls for services from the police department, from citizens. Do we quantify that?
Can we quantify that?
Or is that something that CMPD does? And how do you guys talk to one another on a quarterly basis about a commercial property that may be getting a number of calls for services?
So typically what happens, so we attend the bi-monthly NEST meetings at CMPD, and typically through community coordinators, we'll be able to communicate on a regular basis who they're having issues with, and then we can go and identify, are there any code issues? We'll typically get a referral from them, and vice versa. If we're having an issue with a particular commercial property, we will refer that back to CMPD to try to get that on the NEST list as well. And then bi-monthly, we talk about those properties. Not only is it CMPD and code enforcement, but you have the fire department, you have Mecklenburg County Health. So you have several agencies involved that are trying to communicate on a regular basis on problem properties.
How do we highlight that? How do we kind of bring that to, more of a public intention when a commercial property is receiving numerous calls for services? I'm not sure, other than the internal mechanism, when does it become an issue where council should be involved in terms of taking some type of proactive action?
The best thing would for council to make a referral to both CMPD and to code, and that would get the ball rolling, much like you made the referral for the Beatties Ford Road structure.
Okay.
And you may be getting information from your constituents that's not necessarily making it to staff. But once we have that, then we'll collaborate with CMPD and our other partners to determine, are they getting calls? What are we seeing? What is our case history? And then figuring out how to move forward from there.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Jane, I have a question about that too. And I do see that noise ordinance is considered under nuisance abatement, so I appreciate that. Are you saying that council could make a referral if we keep getting complaints about a particular property? There's one in the Plaza Midwood area in particular, it's a noise ordinance issue, and the neighbors keep complaining, but they're getting a lot of pushback from CMPD. In some cases, just not showing up anymore to measure the sound and that kind of thing. It's sort of a known violator, and so how do we as council members get information on what the process has been? I don't know when it gets turned over to you guys, when it stays with CMPD for a noise ordinance violation, and how do we find out what the status is of a violation or repeat violations for a business?
So I don't want to speak for CMPD, but they're the ones that are going to receive the initial complaints if it's coming through 911. If it's coming from as far as the noise issue is concerned, we kind of wait for those referrals from them. But there are times when we will get a referral either from a council member or a citizen will contact us directly. That's when we reach out to CMPD and say, we are getting complaints about this. And we have somebody that we have dedicated to the noise ordinance. And she is working really closely with the community officers in CMPD to address any noise issues. An example I can share right now is Penn House on Central Avenue.
That's the one, yeah.
Yes, so we've actually been working on that property for several years. It's been an issue, probably since not too long after Penn House opened. And so we've already been out once with CMPD to do noise readings at night. And so, we will set those things up so that we can be a part of that process. And we've had conversations with the neighbors. We've had conversations with the business. At the end of the day, per the ordinance, CMPD has to label them as a chronic noise producer. And then that's when enforcement action takes place by Housing and Human Services.
Okay, so I think that's the big gray area for us council members, is how we get that to happen, because we get complaints about that business all the time. And, the neighbors feel like nobody's listening anymore, but if the calls are true, they appear to be a chronic offender, but it's sort of that black box of not knowing how it makes it back out the other side to be deemed a chronic offender and what action takes place at that point.
And that is, CMPD makes that designation as a chronic noise producer, and then that's when a mitigation plan starts to get put in place.
Okay,
And we talk at the front end before they have to be labeled a chronic noise producer.
Okay, because it's just confusing, because you've got noise ordinance under both code enforcement and CMPD, but I'll reach out to CMPD then and ask about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Any questions virtually? There's no questions virtually. Jane, okay, I look forward to the process moving forward. Again, I hope that we can keep a critical eye on these commercial properties that really have crime-related calls for service. I think that's my narrowly tailored focus for me as a member of the committee, is really understanding when that alarm bell gets sound via CMPD and or code, that there's a chronic problem at a commercial spot that deals with selling of drugs, gang activity, loitering, where neighbors are consistently calling in over and over again at a particular site. I know Councilmember Wallington has expressed some of the same things as well. And so those are the lens when you come back, that I will be kind of taking a look at how you can kind of elevate that to some type of, I don't know how you would help us kind of define that or be able to track that, but I think it shouldn't come to a point where years go by and then a council member makes an inquiry, and then we find out that something like that's been going on at a commercial site for years. Okay? I appreciate you. Thank you very much. Item number 2 is Willie Ratchford from the Community Relations, and we will get a presentation on reentry housing. Willie, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, Councilman Grimm, and let me start off by thanking you for your leadership and thanking the other members on this committee for their leadership and this opportunity to talk about fair housing for people with criminal records here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. With this presentation, I'm going to do 5 things. I will start off talking a little, providing a little background information on this particular problem here in our community. I then will spend some time to talk about the City of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County's fair housing ordinances, which are administered by the staff of the Community Relations Committee. We will then talk about guidance that we have gotten from HUD with regards to how fair housing for people with criminal backgrounds should be handled. We then will talk about a presentation that was made to the Community Relations Committee perhaps a little over a month ago from the Reentry Housing Alliance. And then we'll talk about next steps in this process. So most of you are aware that there are multiple organizations in this community who at this time are making requests to consider amending the City of Charlotte's Fair Housing Ordinance to include additional protections. And one reason for this is criminal backgrounds which negatively impact housing stability. And this is something that actually follows a person around for a lifetime. As I mentioned, there are multiple groups who are advocating for removal of certain barriers that prevent people with criminal records from getting housing and actually getting their lives back on track. We'll talk a little more later on about the Reentry Housing Alliance Group, but based upon research that they've done, it shows that the North Carolina prison population grew by 134% over the past 38 years, that more than 3,300 people have been released in 2019 from incarceration right here in the Charlotte metro area. Over 12,000 people in North Carolina are currently on post-release or parole. Over 70,000 in North Carolina are currently on probation, and 70% of households assisted by Housing Charlotte have an adult with a criminal record or some form of criminal background. And then 8% of urban and suburban adult population have a felony record in our community. And that equates to about 55,000 people right here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg whose lives might be adversely impacted if they're seeking housing and they come across a rental provider who does not allow them to rent just based strictly upon a criminal background record. The Housing Recovery Task Force and CRC recommended that reentry fair housing issues be explored to help remove barriers to housing for people with criminal backgrounds. And again, as I said, we'll talk more later about the Reentry Housing Alliance's request to amend the Charlotte Fair Housing Ordinance. Wendy, you may move on. And so let me start off by talking about Charlotte-Mecklenburg's Fair Housing Ordinance. Ordinances, as I indicated, the City of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County both have fair housing ordinances which prohibit discrimination in housing practices. And both of those ordinances, which mirror one another, are administered by the staff of the Community Relations Committee. Annually, we process anywhere from 30 to 40 investigations, and the bulk of those, the reasons that those cases come before us are that people are alleging discrimination either based on their race, their disability, or familiar status. And familiar status means that you have children who are 18 years of age or younger in your custody, because the city ordinance and the county ordinance, as well as federal law, does not allow apartment complexes, except under certain conditions, to discriminate against families with children. Now, a reentry or criminal background is really not a protected class under fair housing law. However, we have received guidance from HUD on how we can investigate complaints in which people are alleging that they have been discriminated against because of their criminal backgrounds. The Community Relations Committee, we have researched our past investigations, and before the HUD guidance, we had very few instances where we got inquiries from folk who were concerned about being denied housing because of their background status. However, since the guidance, we actually had a case in 2019 that we thought settled really nicely. And this is a case, was a case between an African-American female in an apartment complex located here in our community. The respondent denied the complainant housing due to the complainant's felony conviction, stating that they would not rent to anyone who has anything more than a parking ticket on their record. Our findings as a result of our investigations was that the complainant's conviction was nonviolent, that it had occurred over 30 years ago in another state, and the complainant had no other convictions since that time. With this information, the investigation concluded that the respondent's policy and practice regarding non-rental to persons with criminal backgrounds or convictions actually created an unjustified discriminatory effect. The respondent, and once we shared that information with them, they actually settled this complaint. Now, when we do investigations, we're required to attempt conciliation concurrently as we are investigating. And if you are successful with conciliation, you can close the complaint. And so we had a successful conciliation in this particular complaint. And the respondents provided to the complainant an apology letter, a check for $6,500. They committed to participate in fair housing training that was provided by the staff of the Community Relations Committee. And they made changes to their policies and procedures related to criminal backgrounds at all 68 of their rental properties nationwide. And we thought that that was really significant. And so we have the ability to actually do this. Both the city ordinance and the county ordinance have been certified as being substantially equivalent to the federal fair housing law. And what that means is that our law has essentially the same remedies to address housing discrimination as does the federal law. Originally, when our laws were passed back in 1980, the ordinances prohibited housing discrimination based on race, sex, religion, national origin, and color. In 1988, after the federal fair housing law was amended to include disability and familial status as protected classes, we were also successful in getting the city ordinance and the county ordinance amended to include those two protected classes. However, this required enabling legislation from the state of North Carolina. Wendy? I want to now talk quickly a little about HUD guidance. And this guidance was actually first issued in 2016. And they issued an application of Fair Housing Act standards to the use of criminal records by providers of housing and real estate related transactions. The guidance is intended to end the practice of landlords denying applicants based on a criminal record when the denial might violate the Fair Housing Act. And it would also therefore violate our local fair housing laws because they are substantially equivalent to the federal law. This standard or this guidance actually applies to all landlords and not to those who are HUD subsidized. There was a lot of confusion initially in that people thought that this only applied to HUD subsidized housing, but additional clarification has been provided to indicate that it applies to all landlords. Next slide, please. The guidance also talks about policy to use criminal records as part, how landlords might use policy to use criminal records as part of their screening process. And HUD's guidance is that the criteria must be narrowly tailored, that it still needs to prove that this tailored policy is necessary to serve a substantial, legitimate, non-discriminatory interest, and they must be able to show that it's tailored use of criminal background checks accurately distinguishes between criminal conduct that indicates a demonstrable risk to resident safety and or property and criminal conduct that does not. One question that was raised is that can the landlord take into account the criminal background of applicants as part of their screening criteria without actually violating federal law or our local laws? And HUD does provide a safe harbor for landlords. If a landlord uses criminal background checks and only excludes applicants who have been convicted of the illegal manufacture or distribution of a controlled substance, then they might deny housing on that basis. The Fair Housing Act specifically states that landlords do not have to make housing available to persons with such convictions. Next slide, please. We have some other general guidance from HUD, guidelines which landlords must consider if they choose to go beyond denial of applicants convicted of illegal manufacture or distribution of controlled substances. And you all can read this later here. The landlords will still bear the burden of proving that any discriminatory effect caused by such a tailored policy or practice involving the use of criminal background check is justified. In other words, the landlords have the burden of showing that that their policy does not even if it's neutral on its face, that the policy does not have the effect of adversely impacting someone who might have a criminal background. And this is crucial when we consider what people who are more likely than not to have a criminal background actually look like. And a lot of them look like me. Next slide, please. So based on this guidance from HUD, the only sure way a landlord can avoid fair housing liability is that if he or she wants to consider an applicant's criminal history, is to limit the policy to exclude only applicants with prior convictions for illegal manufacture or distribution of controlled substances. And then if a landlord wants to deny an applicant for any other conviction, the landlord must be able to prove that the particular policy is necessary in order to achieve a substantial, legitimate, non-discriminatory interest, and that there is no less discriminatory way to achieve this particular interest. Next slide. As I had mentioned earlier, the Reentry Housing Alliance had actually come before the Community Relations Committee to make a request that we work with them to approach City Council about amending the current ordinance with the following language and protections, which will address the issues of people with criminal backgrounds seeking housing here in Charlotte. They specifically want rental housing providers to defer any inquiry into criminal convictions of applicants and their household members until after the applicant is qualified. They want rental housing providers who deny an applicant based on their criminal history to allow the applicant to provide evidence of reporting errors, rehabilitation, and or mitigating factors related to convictions that would show they are a good candidate despite their criminal records. They want that a rental applicant shall be guaranteed the right to file a complaint if they believe there has been some discrimination because of a criminal record. They also ask that you appoint or create an administrative body to investigate and enforce all rental complaints related to the regulations in the city's ordinance. And that is actually already in place with the staff of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Community Relations Committee. And then finally, they would ask that we direct the rental housing providers shall not post in or list in writing a description of those matters identified by the ordinance that may be considered by the landlord as a basis for adverse action, including criminal convictions in years since the date of a particular conviction. Next slide, please. Wendy? Oh, thank you. So here are the next steps that we would like to take in this process. We realize that there's additional work to be done, so we want to survey landlords and gather other data to determine current practices and the scope of the problem locally. We want to be able to create a business case for this. We want to develop and enhance education opportunities for landlords and people exiting prison and the court system. Very often when it comes to issues of fair housing, we don't get as many cases as we probably should get because people don't know what their rights are. And so as a part of this process, we want to educate the community. And to give you some sense as to how this works, biannually, HUD does a study which looks at housing discrimination across the country. And these studies have shown that annually there are about 2 million instances of housing discrimination that happens across the country. However, only about 25 to 30,000 of those cases actually get before an organization like the Community Relations Committee, which investigates housing discrimination. And that means that the vast majority of housing discrimination that might be happening not only across the country, but right here in North Carolina and in Charlotte is actually not being addressed. And so this education, providing education to people regarding their rights when it relates to fair housing could be significant. And then finally, at some point, we'd like to bring back recommendations to this committee for you all's consideration as you consider the possibility of either creating a standalone ordinance or amending the current fair housing ordinance to include criminal background as a protected class. And with that, I will answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Willie, for the presentation, and I now open the floor up for questions. Do we have any virtual questions from council members? Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Willie, thanks for the presentation. I do have a question. You know, oftentimes our ordinances on paper look good, and then in practice is really where, you know, the sausage is made. So I like that you're saying that we're going to collect the data, really figure out what the problem is. But are we working with the sheriff's office? Because I think, you know, so many times we get some really good information that comes out from there. And I think the education part of it is so important because people don't know what their rights are. They don't know what is available to them for even finding help for finding an apartment and that kind of thing. And so I wonder how much you've worked with the sheriff's office on any of the recommendations or anything that could help provide more strength to the ordinance.
Thank you, Mayor Tim, and Mayor Tim. Thank you. What is your position? I'm
That's
sorry.
okay.
Mayor Pro Tem, it's Wednesday, right?
Mayor Pro Tem. There you go. I'm sorry. That just escaped me for a minute. But thank you, Julie.
That's
That
good
is
too.
a really great question. Today we have not worked with the Sheriff's Department, but actually that is a really great suggestion and something that we probably should do because if the Sheriff's Office, if we could form a partnership with the Sheriff's Office, and they get an opportunity to act, and we got an opportunity to perhaps provide this education to folk who are being released or from incarceration. At least they would know what their housing rights are, and as they go out and seek housing, and if they feel that they have been victims of discrimination because of criminal background, then they would know who to call or who to come to get redressed with their complaints. But that is a really great idea.
Thank you. Yeah, that number 55,000 was just stunning to me. And that's 55,000 people that we could help have a productive life and help our own workforce here in Charlotte that needs them to be a part of it. So, yeah, anything we can do to connect with those closest to the problem and help educate folks, I think we should be doing. So thank you. Thanks for this work.
Absolutely. Thank you.
There's no questions virtually. I just wanted to comment that, one, I think the series of next steps are appropriate. I think it's really important that we gather as much data to determine what's happening actually on the ground right here in Charlotte, that we do not make any assumptions. So I think the data collection piece is extremely important, as well as the educational piece. I believe that's really important as well. I had an opportunity to speak with Mrs. Wyman as well as the city attorney, so I know I have a great understanding of where the guardrails are in terms of things that we can and we can't do that will kind of protect us and keep us whole. But certainly, we all acknowledge that this is something that we would not want to see happen in our community. So, Willie, I look forward to you coming back with the next steps answered and any recommendations for the committee. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in the community as well as on council in reference to this particular item, but I think we all agree that we want to know specifically what we're talking about. We don't want to provide a remedy where there may not be a problem per se, but I think it's really important that we kind of survey the landscape and making sure that we're making factual decisions. So we look forward to you coming back to the committee with your responses shortly.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Johnson, welcome.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I just have a couple of questions for Willie. That was a great presentation. Thank you.
I was wondering where you were, Ms. Johnson. I was just like,
She was trying to ask a question. I saw her.
Okay. So you mentioned the HUD ordinance as it stands. And if I understood correctly, did you say that the HUD ordinance currently does not allow denial of housing for individuals with criminal records unless it's a drug conviction?
That is correct, and it's HUD guidance the federal fair housing law does not have criminal background as a protected class. However, based on guidance from HUD, organizations like ours can receive complaints of discrimination based on criminal background, based upon the guidance. In the same way,
I want to clarify. So
Okay.
there also a part of that ordinance that says if the individual has received treatment, there's some language to that about treatment and second chances or something, right? For the drug.
Yeah. Regarding treatment, I think what you're referring to, the ordinance does prohibit discrimination based on disability, and someone who might be receiving treatment for a drug addiction that may be considered disability under fair housing, and we would have to investigate that.
Okay. Yeah. See if there's something in the language, because I worked for the Housing Authority years ago. And there's something about a drug conviction, if they have documentation that proves that they received treatment or recovery or something that might be able to be mitigated. But it's interesting to me that HUD even speaks to the criminal record unless there's a drug conviction. We know in the field that a criminal background is truly the new Jim Crow. You know, folks are discriminated in housing and employment. This is a real problem. I would like to know if there's a way to get statistics on individuals who are living in the hotels who have a criminal background, because we know that it may not be a matter of income because they're paying to live in the hotel, but there is something that there's a barrier. So I'd like to know if we can get statistics from some of the community organizations working with them, how much of a barrier this is for individuals in the hotels, and also if there's a way to work with the county for the individuals in Tent City. So we know that the barriers for permanent housing is more than just the lack of inventory. There are barriers such as criminal records. I also wanted to know how a person files a complaint with CRC. Is that an easy process? Is it on the front of your page or a user-friendly process? Because if it's a matter of not obtaining the information, we can certainly get that information out there. Mr. Chair, this is a huge problem. I was just on a call this morning with the COC work group for persons with criminal history. This is an issue that needs to be addressed because it's a huge barrier for the community. And also, there's something lastly that I want to say. This presentation is on reentry housing, and when I hear reentry housing, I think of transitional housing. I think of someone coming home and reentering society. So maybe that's why it doesn't relate to everyone. This is fair housing. You had a situation with a young lady, or younger lady who had been out, or had a record from 30 years ago, and this was still following her. This is happening every day. So if we take the term reentry housing off of this, and this is affecting our neighbors, the folks who've had records 30 years ago or 10 years ago or 5 years ago. But fair housing is fair housing for all. So I just kind of like to take that, for us to think of it not as reentry housing, think of it as fair housing, fair, non-discriminatory housing for our residents of the city.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for that, Ms. Johnson. And I think to take reentry housing, that's the easiest thing I've been asked to do all day. That would be real easy, because to your point, this really is about discrimination against people with criminal backgrounds, and that's it's not necessarily only reentry housing. So removing that should be an easy thing to do.
Okay, thank you. And like you said, we know the disparity in the criminal justice system and how
Yes.
many, how that affects
Yes.
folks of color. So thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for those very appropriate questions, and I think we all were taking notes in terms of some of the steps that you would like to see, including in the survey and the data collection process. So I think those are points well taken, and also I think when we come back too, we should have a conversation relating to the guidance that HUD is giving us, also versus the ordinance itself, right? And there's a distinguishing difference between the two. Ms. Wyman?
I think Mr. Rashford pointed it out. I just wanted to make sure we're all clear, and the attorneys are here and can help. When we're talking about HUD has released guidance, we have a fair housing ordinance that CRC administers, and so I just want to make sure we're clear on the language. But when we come back, and it's going to take us, I don't want to speak for Mr. Rashford, but when we come back, we can make sure that we have all of that language cleaned up so that we're sure about, we're talking about housing for all, not just reentry, as Ms. Johnson has pointed out. But I think the point here is let us do the work, let us do the research so that we really understand, make sure that we can educate as widely as we can, and so that we understand the scope of the problem here locally through collecting the data that has already been laid out.
Absolutely.
That's what I just said. Thank you. No, she said it a lot better than I did. That's the point I was trying to make. So I think we're all on the same page. Obviously, it's going to take some time to do the data collection. I think that's really important that we get it right on the front end so that we won't crash at the landing. And so if there's not any other questions, we will allow Willie to sign off and get to work. And we know the work is going to be good. Willie?
Thank you, Mr. Graham. It is, you indicated that we're on the same page, but we should all remember it's important that we're on the same page and in the same book. If it's not the same book, then we're lost.
That's why I like you, Willie.
That's another Willieism.
That's true. We got to make sure, or another way that we're in the same zip code, right?
Absolutely. All right, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
I got it. So I think we're all good to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction. Willie's going to do the research for us and the work. And that was the last agenda item. Just a couple of comments as we close the meeting out. One, I just want to thank the committee for all the good work that we have done this year on housing, whether it was the Housing Task Force or the committee itself. And I was hoping that Mrs. Wyman can kind of capture some of that work for us in a summary as we're going to prepare to kind of close out the year. I think one of the things that we do not do a good job of, at least, and I'll take responsibility for it, is not sharing with the community the good works that we are doing. And so if we can have maybe a year-end summary, nothing fancy, I mean, just kind of outlining some of the major highlights and achievement of the committee throughout the year, I think will be appropriate if we kind of close out the year. Ms. Wyman, can you help me with that?
Yes, sir, you threw me a curveball. I thought you meant like right now, but I'm assuming you're asking, just to clarify, you want us to bring that back to you at the December meeting?
Tomorrow would be nice, but no. No, you can, not even the December meeting, you can, first of the year, as we kind of close out the year.
Sure, absolutely.
Not an annual report, but just kind of a summary so we can really tell the community what we've done this year as relates to the affordable housing, passing the bonds, the housing trust funds, how we responded with the CARES Acts, what we did for the homelessness with those monies. I think we really got a compelling story to tell and that we should share.
Absolutely, we'd love to do that.
Okay. And then our next meeting is it's in December, and so I don't expect Willie to be back in front of us until probably in January, and that would give them some time to really kind of do the work. So I just want to make sure I set the expectation with the committee members as we approach the Thanksgiving and the Christmas holidays, doing the surveys, et cetera, the data collection. The December meeting is going to be packed enough in terms of really diving through the source of income. So Willie will probably come back before us in the first of the year, which would give him, Pam, and the staff legally to kind of do what they need to do. So everybody's good with that? Okay? And then, I think that's it, unless someone wants to prolong the meeting any longer.
Comment. This is Councilmember Watlington. As Ms. Wyman, as you're pulling together the achievements, it will be helpful for me if you captured anything that was outstanding as far as a plan forward. I think it's absolutely appropriate to consider what has been done. I just want to make sure that I'm speaking for myself. I want to make sure that I am abreast of the horizon so that I can make sure that I've got the information I need to enable my folks to give input on the front end. So if you've got any information in regards to what outstanding items there are, I would appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay? I think there was a motion to close. I'll second it. All those in favor say aye. Those against? See y'all in December. Thank you very much.